Good day, good evening, good afternoon, good whatever day part it is, wherever the heck you're at. This is Jeffrey Candelaria along with Jimmy Tran. This is another iteration of Inside Reality, where we talk about topics that are germane to all of us in the human experience. And we try not to use platitudes or cliches as much as possible. Today, we're going to talk about MAGA and how much MAGA do we really want to go back to and to re-implement into today's, experience in America. And we're going to move across several lines sociologically, politically, technology, economics, because all of those relate to the human experience here in America, of course. And my co-host and the person that produces the show is Jimmy Tran. We would really appreciate it if you'd like the show, not like the show, but give us some attention, give us some time, but share and subscribe and talk about the show because I think it's pretty interesting. So again, we're going to talk today about how much MAGA do we really want to go back to and implement into the human experience here in America. And we usually drop the show on Thursday or Fridays. Thank you again for attending to the show. Jimmy, how are you doing? Are you in prison? Where are you?
I'm doing
What the
great.
hell?
I'm not in my studio right now. I'm
Okay.
remote today, so we're opening up a wellness center, and so I'm just here in our little lobby area, just kind of set up because I ran out of time getting back to the studio so that we can
Yeah.
record this. Uh, anyway, I think that before we can even really go down that path, I mean, I think that it's important that we define what MAGA. I mean, I think
Yeah.
what MAGA
Yeah.
means. I think that different people have different interpretation or perspective of what MAGA mean, and obviously there are people out there that may even have the impression that, well, we were never great. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, we do have people that are in that camp. You know, in terms of,
But let's
well,
remind everybody
how
what
can we
MAGA is. Trump's, uh, uh,
slogan?
I guess it would be kind of a mantra: "Make
Yeah,
America Great
yeah,
Again."
great again.
And
Yeah,
he's, that's been his calling card: "Make America Great Again." And when I hear that, I have, I'm very ambivalent about that, and we're going to talk about that obviously. So when you hear "Make America Great Again," you're younger than me, you're Chinese, whatever. You have your own way of looking at truth and the world. What do you think, and how do you define MAGA, and kind of extrapolate out how it could, work today? MAGA, Make America Great Again. He's already done some of that, which we'll talk about. But what is MAGA to you when you think and feel about MAGA?
well, I think that one of the big things, as I've shared before, in terms of MAGA, would be um, actualizing the vision of our founding, document, the Declaration of Independence. Where with equality coming into play, and then of course, I think that the other part is Martin Luther King and his dream. I have a dream that one day, you know, that is, not the contents. It's the contents of your character, not the color of your skin. And that defines who you are and stuff like that. And I think that when we you can make a lot of different cases of where we are in terms of that journey. Certainly not everyone in the United States have experienced that whole spectrum of experience, but I think that as a society in general, I think that we have reached a certain points of what we would say are greatness. I mean, certainly militarily, we are pretty powerful, although some would argue that we may not be as powerful in some aspects. But I'm just saying that there's MAGA is a very broad term that I think covers a lot of different things. I mean,
So
I don't think that we're
let me ask you a question a different way. Again, this is Inside
okay.
Reality. I'm Jeffrey Candelaria, Jimmy Tran. Today we're talking about what is MAGA. What do you think Trump means by his interpretation of MAGA? That's what I want you to talk about.
Sure.
And I have my perspective on it. And you've kind of inferred, or what I'm inferring from what you've said so far, or talked about so far, or gleaned so far from what you said is you think Trump is talking about going back to Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton's version of installing the vision of the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation and the Declaration of Independence? Because I don't.
No,
I think
that's
Trump
not.
wants to. I think Trump
No.
wants to go back to like the 50s and 60s, where, again, to be honest with you, there was a certain elite white dominance. That's kind of what
Yeah.
I think. I mean, I could be wrong, and I voted for Trump 3 times, but I think that's what he thinks when he says MAGA. We'll talk further about that. What do you think he means as Donald Trump president when he talks about re-implementing MAGA, make America great again? What is he talking about
Well,
from your point of view?
from what I can glean from what he says, a lot of it is the economic drivers, right? I mean, we were a manufacturing powerhouse during the Industrial Revolution, right?
Okay.
I mean, we have incredible expertise and knowledge, and we went to the moon, whether you believe we did or not, right?
No, I believe we went to the moon 6 times. Come on.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
So, I mean, that type of greatness, I mean, that we don't have today for one reason or another. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we soft pedal a lot. We backtrack a lot. We over indulge and over protect, if you will. So there's a lot of these things that are impeding those type of things,
Yeah.
And so to me, I think that that's what he means.
Yeah, you make a really interesting. You make an interesting point that I hadn't really considered in preparation for the show. I was thinking more of MAGA from Trump's perspective, from a sociological, almost hierarchical society, kind of being in a caste system perspective, because I do think he's a bit of a white dominant guy. Unapologetically, I think he even, promulgates that openly. But I hadn't considered the economic piece, and I think you're right. I think part of when he talks about make America great again, which I hadn't given it as much gravity as I should have, is he wants us to be industrial revolution, manufacturing strong, and also remember post World War II manufacturing economically strong. In the 50s, this country, from about, what was it, 44 to about 55, somewhere in there, this was the most dominant country economically the world had ever seen. And most of America's population still believed, and this is what I also want to talk about, in self-reliance, consequences to behavior, and making a contribution economically to the greater good. I mean, that's a bit of a sweeping statement, but I think since the 50s, with the hippie generation that had all this idealism going on, and let's all make love and let's all get along, brothers and sisters, which is a nice thought. But I think what that also did, the hippie movement, it perpetrated, or excuse me, it engendered this almost theology or ideology that we don't have to make a contribution. We don't have to be self-reliant. We don't have to go to work.
Yeah.
Something called the authority or love is going to take care of us.
Yeah.
That kind of nonsense. So then the MAGA that Trump talks about, to your point, from an economic point of view, he wants people to get off their ass and make a contribution and work in some capacity. That's a really interesting point. So I agree with him there. And I think you agree when he talks about MAGA from that point of view, from that perspective, making an economic contribution as an individual, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, to be fair, based on what I've heard despite some of the different memes or whatever is out there regarding this, I don't think that the piece that you're talking about is that much of a priority for him. In just from my observation, if you were to break down all of the stuff he talks about, when he refers to making America great again, he very seldom refer to any group of people. Here's another thing that's really interesting too. Like if you watch kind of like how he gives people nicknames and stuff, like Crooked
Yeah.
Hillary or Sleepy Joe. And what's really interesting is that he doesn't actually, if you it's not a pejorative in the sense that, if somebody called him, like let's say it's ugly whatever, or the um, the statements that the nicknames that he makes are actually based on their actions
Yeah.
and
Or
their
inaction.
character,
Or
or
inaction.
inaction, or inactions, or character, rather than their stature or their color, or any of those things. I mean, if you watch,
Okay.
you notice he doesn't
Yeah.
actually attack them for any of those, the so-called intrinsic or
So
or
it's not it's not as
identities.
that it's not as ad hominem as it sounds at first
Exactly.
glance.
Correct.
It's actually their unwillingness to participate in the American dream, the
Exactly.
standard American dream. That's a really,
Exactly.
see, this is why this is an interesting podcast, because I hadn't thought of that. But you, Jimmy, in prison, in your little prison cell there,
Hey,
you
you're the
actually
one with the
made,
bricks.
that's a good point. You make such a salient point that I've actually moved my my perspective on what I thought I was going to say, because I was a little bit more hung up on the sociological "Make America Great Again." Like I've talked about this before. I thought when Trump was talking, and today we're talking about on Inside Reality, what does MAGA mean from Trump's perspective? How does it relate to all of us? I thought he was more talking about. I want to go back to the days, and I've talked about this before, when the Brady Bunch was on, or My Three
Yeah.
Sons was on, or, Leave It to Beaver, where you had two white people and a little kid, and they lived in the suburbs, and it was all, you didn't see
Sure.
any people of color at all.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. Yeah.
know, I mean, I thought it was more that white dominant elitist point that he was espousing. I still think there's some of that when he talks about Make America Great Again, but I changed my mind. I think it's more economic, manufacturing robustness, economic robustness, people all making a contribution economically.
And the
Um,
sensibility of
but
policies
but I
that
think
are
but I think
leading
Simon,
not to leading to peace, like policies that would lead to peace. That's
yeah,
the part I think why he's so frustrated with what's going on, with whether it's the peace talk that's not happening well
yeah.
in some cases, or the wars. I mean, not the war, the economic stuff that happens with the tariffs. I mean, all of that, if you look at it, is all trying
Well,
to. That's why.
I think that's his geopolitical ego. What I would call the
Correct.
geopolitical ego. He wants to go back in
Sure.
a time when America was geopolitically the
Really
dominant
dominant.
apex. You
Correct.
know, they were at the very zenith of power,
Correct.
technologically,
Yeah.
sociologically, economically. They were on the vanguard for everything. And now, you have other countries that can vie for that same position: South America,
Yeah.
China,
Yeah.
Japan,
Yeah.
to much lesser extent, the United Kingdom. But I think simultaneously to the economic uh, position that he occupies, that he wants to go back to. I mean, that's his perspective about making America great again. I also think he wants, and I agree with him here as well, more civility, less
Yeah.
people walking around in public in pajamas, more decorum, and a little bit of
Yeah.
more of that sense of of je ne sais quoi. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I think he
Yeah.
wants a little bit.
Absolutely.
When I first got on an airplane in 1969, a commercial airplane, I'm a little kid. My mother had just died. My grandmother dressed me up in my little penguin
Yeah.
outfit back then. But everybody, I'm being silly, but people in airports, people got on planes, people that went to
Oh
Las
yeah.
Vegas, Nevada, people who went to Disneyland, they were dressed up. And I
Yep.
do like that part of MAGA, making America great again, where people have more of a sense of civility and decorum and some grace. I don't like people seen in public in pajamas personally. But do you think he also, that is Trump, when he talks about
Yes.
MAGA,
Yep. That
has a
is part
certain
of it. Yep.
desire for that as well, the civility piece?
Absolutely. Correct. That is part. That's definitely part and parcel to his great America. You know, That's again, that's why even if you look at it, his whole America First policy, right, and the approach that he takes, he's like, look, I'm the president of the United States. I'm not the president of Mexico. I'm not the president of China. I'm not the president of any of these other places.
Yeah.
I would love it for them to make their country first and make their country great again. And that, I mean, he said that many, many times, which is why I was saying that it has nothing to do. This is why my gleaning of what he says is very little to do with the identity of the person rather than
Yeah.
the contribution and all these other things that we just talked about. And I think that it's important. And the other thing that I thought was interesting too is that I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and somebody pointed out that you never see very seldom do you see Trump do two things. One is cuss, okay, and use really profanity, and then the other one is dressing casually.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great point.
I mean, he
Yeah.
he plays golf, and yeah, he might dress a little casual, polo shirt and
Yeah.
shorts or whatever, but he always dresses in a suit and tie and stuff.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and to me, there's a certain um, strength to that, right? When
There
you're
is.
casual, when you're casual, I mean, and we know that's because in corporate America, we've seen it. There's a certain authority to it when we're able to present ourselves in a certain way. Now, I never really believed that. That to me was hogwash for most of my life. My dad bless his heart, tried to convince me that, hey, how you dress and what you look, is important, because people are not going to take you seriously if you're in flip flops and shorts and so forth and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And I never really cared, but as I grew up and as I encountered the world, if you will, right? When Jimmy meet world, all of a sudden it's a different experience, and that's when I realized, hey,
Oh
you know
yeah.
what? There's
Yeah.
a reality to it. I mean, the
Oh,
the
absolutely.
perception is a big factor.
I read Dale Carnegie's book 40 years ago, Dress for
Yeah, yeah,
Success, all that stuff. Made a
yeah,
big difference. Being
yeah,
eloquent, being well presented. That's why I try to present myself with civility and grace and a
yeah,
certain decorum. Part of it is ego, but part of it is power. People do
yeah,
accept people that are well groomed, articulate, um, have a certain decorum. They are given and assigned a certain grace, a certain authority.
yeah,
So I think you're
absolutely.
right. The other, and today again, we're talking on Inside Reality about MAGA. What do you think the President Trump means when he talks about MAGA? And we've talked about the economic piece. We've talked a little bit about a little bit of the sociological part, the civility part. I also think tied or related to the civility part, which I agree with, obviously, is the trappings of the office of the president. He
Oh yeah,
absolutely embraces as well.
absolutely.
Maybe more than anyone I've seen for a while. And what, good, bad, or ugly, he thinks that office warrants the trappings that traditionally, it would put forth, I guess. Would you
Yeah.
agree with some of that? The trappings
Oh,
of the office
absolutely.
of presidency? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think that there's because if you look at like Trump Tower and all the stuff that I mean, beautiful women. I mean, like the his whole persona and his whole identity
Optics.
and
Optics.
the wraps around this that's why sometimes when you I mean, I'm not saying that, again, I don't know him personally, so I don't know how he would, if there's somebody that fell into the mud, if he's walking down the street, will he get into the mud and pull him out? I don't know, but certainly it would seem that he would, given what I've observed of his um,
Yeah.
um, I mean, because there's two parts, right? There's the part that is playing the part and playing the role of that, whatever it is, So he has and based on what I've heard from people that know him personally, where he is much more. He's not. He's very direct, and he can also do the what do you call it, the locker room talk and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
some of that, of course, got him into trouble. If
Yeah.
you remember the tape, but if you listen to what he said in context, it's he wasn't really saying that he likes it or not like it. He's just making an observation that
Yeah.
because he has money,
Well,
people will do certain things because he has money, just like anybody else would,
yeah.
and so again, a lot of times it's just, if you really look at it, he does he does share very openly and very transparently his observation about things, and that's
Well,
and that's why sometimes people get taken back by it because
yeah. Again, today we're talking about MAGA, Make America Great Again. What does that really mean? And we're trying to dissect and jump into Trump's world experience, and we're trying to figure out what does he mean by it? What do we mean by it? How do we absorb and accept or repudiate it? There are parts of MAGA when I think he talks about it that I do embrace, and I think we've already talked about two elements of what we think MAGA is: making America an economic powerhouse again, which he's I think kind of doing, and bringing back more holistic, ubiquitous civility across all lines, like having more a sense of decorum and grace and civility. I don't think that's a bad thing. But another part of what I think he means by "Make America Great Again" too is, and I only have my life experience, but when I was growing up until about maybe 15 years ago, maybe America prided itself on being logic based, science based,
Mhm.
pragmatically based in a lot of ways. Well, maybe not so much pragmatic because we tend to be a bit ostentatious, but science and logic were pretty foundational. Now, the last 15, 20 years, because of the democratic apparatus and people not working and all the sloth, we've become more emotionally based. And
Yeah,
I think we've moved away from science, logic, pragmatics to how do I feel about something. So I think Trump also, I don't know how you feel about this or think about this. I think Trump also wants to go back to more of a science, technology based, uh, less emotion basing everything, every decision based society. I think
yeah,
he wants to go more to a science, technology based foundational place in America. Then I don't really feel whatever, what my feelings, no pun intended, Trump decision making. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So
yeah,
all the
yeah. I think,
whining and all that stuff. So
yeah.
what do you think
Well,
about that part of it?
I think when you have a point there, and I think that that's part of it too. Um, Now, you said you grew up in the '60s, okay? And so the
The
very
hippies did bring the emotion into it. They did.
well,
They absolutely
that's one
did.
correct, and that's one of the parts that I wanted to point out,
Yeah.
right? I mean, because remember, the other thing too is that we were in an arms race with the Russians. Again,
Yeah.
remember, the historical context is really important. I mean, Sputnik just went up in 1957 or 59 or whatever it was, right? We now have a mandate to go to the moon, right?
Yeah.
And so that became the driving engine that, and so if you really look at it, right? I mean, we just came out of World War II, a couple decades before, and of course victorious, and and we get to, I mean, but at the same time though, we help the world rebuild, right? I mean, this is one of the things too about the American culture is that we not beat you up, and then we help you patch yourself back up, uh,
Yeah, because we
which
want
is
access to your market. So it's pretty
well that too.
selfish. I
Well,
mean,
no, yes,
we
but
resurrected Japan and we immediately started taking advantage of their markets and their technology too. So let's not
yeah,
forget that.
well, yes and no, but Japan didn't have the population that it. I mean, Japan has 180 million people today, roughly. Give 50, 100. I mean, that's a lot of people in that small island, place.
Yeah,
But they
Tokyo
didn't.
is the largest
But
city in the world. What, 40 million
yes,
people or something?
yeah, they didn't have
Yeah.
that kind of population back in World War II. Okay, and they did lose a lot of people too. But even then, they didn't have that, a lot of people. And so that's a very very important part to understand. I mean, of course, in the case of Japan, they didn't have military to feed. Okay, So partly because they didn't have to feed the military, a lot of their money went into industry and so forth. And of course, like I said, the manufacturing, they really just took on, and became a manufacturing powerhouse for a long time. I mean, I remember reading about, in the 50s and 60s, how Japanese products were kind of what Chinese products were like,
Yeah, made in Japan. It was a joke.
it was a joke until it became not a joke. When they started to really embrace the manufacturing standard that Peter Drucker and others that really came from
Well, yeah. I don't want to get off the topic of MAGA, but what
yeah,
changed
no, I
with
get.
Japan was when the oil embargo happened in 73, and we had those
They took
big
advantage of that.
Cadillacs and
Yeah,
those big, huge
yep,
cars that weighed thousands of, 8 tons. I got about 1 mile a gallon.
yeah,
Toyota introduced itself, the
yeah,
Toyota, those little cars, and
yep,
Japan just like was in a perfect. Nothing's perfect. They were in an excellent position to take advantage of that
absolutely,
auto
absolutely,
industry
yeah,
market, and that's when they really inserted themselves into. And
yep,
then, of course, the television sets and all the electronics that followed that. But
yeah, yeah,
you mentioned the whole, and again, we're talking about MAGA, Making America Great Again. What does that really mean? How do we accept it? How do we repudiate it? What does Trump mean by that? But you mentioned, yeah, I grew up partly in the 60s. Yes, it's true. The hippies were a very dominant societal force.
correct.
But at the same time, they ended up looking, I'm not going to say foolish, but they almost were relegated to a place of entertainment, sociological
Sure.
entertainment,
Yeah, to some
because
degree.
because the Saturn rocket, when we went to the moon, it was completely antithetical to the whole commune, smoking dope,
Sure.
walking around naked and you're my brother and sister and all that. And then also the microwave oven, uh,
TV dinner,
the little pocket computer. What the hell is that called? A calculator. I know that
calculator.
sounds
Yeah,
dumb now to people that are younger, but those technologies, like those kind of technologies, if you will, really made us forget about the hippie commune thing and emphasize the practical efficiencies that convenient technology was bringing into our world. And you've talked about the price of convenience before,
yeah,
and maybe we can talk about it again. But I'm mentioning this because that's what I think Trump celebrates: the
yep,
home computer, the introduction of whatever works efficiently that represents also economic robustness for that industry. He does celebrate. He does celebrate,
yeah,
and I think that's part of the whole "Make America Great Again" too. The celebration of innovative technological achievement. I think that's another
yeah,
dimension to what I think Trump means by "Make America Great Again."
yeah. No, I agree that that's definitely part of it. Remember, he was born in this in I mean, right after, I think it was like 1946, I think, right?
Yeah.
I think, and so he, you know, we there was the Great Depression, right? That really pretty much ended when the war. I mean, Second World War was one of the economic driver that pulled us out of the Great Depression.
Well, it
And
took
of
some.
course,
You got to remember, it took some time because the depression started in 29. It actually
29.
started a
Well,
little
the
bit before
market
that.
crash yeah, the market crashed in 29,
Yeah.
but it wasn't in full steam until really the 30s.
Yeah,
You
the mid
know,
30s, the
well,
mid
the mid
30s.
30s and stuff.
But remember, World War One, we got into it pretty incrementally in
Correct.
40, the beginning of 42,
World War
really.
II. Yeah, yeah, World
And
War
we
II.
really
Yeah,
didn't go full bore until like Ford and
44. Yep.
some of these other manufacturing plants that were making cars started manufacturing tanks and guns
Yeah,
and all
yeah.
that.
Correct.
And then
Correct.
really galvanizing a, a strategic plan with the allies, Australia and England and France.
Yep.
Well, France, of course, was taken over by the Nazis in 41, 42, I think it was.
Yeah.
The point is, we became a manufacturing juggernaut. in,
Sure,
by
exactly.
43, 44, 45.
And we do have
And
we did have an
we
advantage.
maintained that position for a while.
Yes, and we did have an advantage, the fact that we have two oceans that separated us
Yeah.
from where our enemies were, right? I mean, Europe, the Germans were in Europe, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, yes, I mean, there was South America and all that, but they didn't really participate, even though it was a world war. I don't know how much of South America, even Mexico, were part of any of that. I don't recall a lot of that. Mostly it was European war with Asia involved in a lot of different aspects, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
because Hitler, I don't think Hitler was concerned with Tijuana at the time. I don't
no,
mean to
no,
sound, I'm not
but
trying to
at the
be
same time,
flippant. I'm just saying he was more concerned with
Brazil,
London and New York and,
but Brazil
that.
was a very important, but Brazil was very important, and because there was a lot of trade that was taking, I mean, like the rubbers and stuff like that was coming out
Yeah.
of Brazil
Yeah.
and certain parts of
Yeah.
South America. So there was that aspect of things that were happening. Okay, so um,
But again, how
but
does that
anyway,
relate to MAGA, making America great again? How,
so
what,
well, it's related because again, what I'm saying about with Trump, right? I mean, he grew up in the aftermath of World War, you know, so basically what he experienced was basically the baby boomer, right? I mean, he was a baby boomer, you know, and he experienced life pretty much in that context. And so to me,
so you make another
that's
good
one of
point.
his.
He actually lived when America was at the apex of civilization, really, in the 50s.
Yeah, correct.
You're right. I wasn't. I was born, a little after
Right
that,
after
but
that, yeah, yep,
and you weren't. And a lot of these,
no,
no offense, Democrats who talk about socialism and all that, they never saw that economic apex, that
correct.
technological apex, even the civility. I wouldn't call that an apex because I guess you could argue Europe in the 17th, 18th century, they had a sort of a civility too in France and in England and all that. But Trump did see the economic apex and also maybe even to some degree some of the sociological apex, although a lot of people that look like you, that look like me, darker peoples, not so much. They weren't part of pop culture. They didn't have the
Yeah,
same access to that apex
well,
lifestyle that he did because he's a white guy. Let's be honest,
yeah.
right?
I
This is
mean,
inside reality.
yeah. Well, that is part of it because well, you got to remember the level of immigration from other places, you know, wasn't really the same, right? I mean, certainly you had the Native Americans that were here, but a lot of them were relegated to like the reservations and so forth. So their contributions were limited in that regard. Um, actually, what's his name? There's an author, Thomas Sowell. He was also he's in his 80s right now, and he's an economist, and he talks about how, you know, for the blacks actually the 40s and the 50s were actually quite good for them economically. They had their own banks. I mean, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's quite interesting what his analysis
Yeah,
and observation was on that.
yeah,
Well, again, like I said, with the Great Society and the New Deal and all that, that started to shift a lot of that
yeah.
wealth
It
and a
broke
lot of
up. It broke up
the
the black family.
the families.
Fathers were no longer
Exactly.
part of
Yep.
that
Correct.
cellular nuclei, and
Yep.
mothers were also incentivized to have more black babies and all that. We're kind of going off on a tangent, but um,
No, but they're all
but
related. And
but
again, when you're talking about greatness,
Trump did see the apex of the country in the 50s when
yeah,
it was the dominant country in the world. It just was.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, you know, the other thing too is that, do you know when Jim Crow was really instituted? You know, with the whites and the colors and so forth. I don't. I mean,
you're
that
talking about
wasn't.
the separation of
Yeah,
populations and whites
because
only
that didn't
and
really.
all that.
Correct. I mean, that didn't happen in the 20s and in the 30s, if I remember correctly. I mean, that only happened really later in the 50s and the 60s as certain things. I mean, I don't know the particulars of that, you know, from a historical standpoint, but it would be interesting if anybody
Well,
knows
maybe we
more
could do a
about
show
that,
on
you
that.
know, share that.
You got to remember
Yeah,
the Brown
um,
versus Board of Education was, I think that was
that was one big factor. Yeah, So,
Well, actually, Plessy versus Ferguson was separate but equal, I think it was. And that was like in the late 1880s, I think. Somebody should comment on that. But this whole notion that you separate whites from blacks, particularly in the South, and that was considered equal, right?
yeah.
Does Trump want to go back to that? I don't think so.
Well,
But
and
some
that's
might,
what
some
the
extremists would
argument
argue
is
that.
yeah, exactly. Um,
We got
so,
about 10
okay, well,
minutes.
I
Got
just
about
pulled
10
up
minutes.
on Google. I asked Dr. Google here, and I guess Jim Crow's laws and practices emerged after the end of Reconstruction, 1877,
Yeah.
and continued into the mid 60s. But I mean, I know that
Well, they still
again, like I
continue
said,
now, but they're just not as
oh yeah,
overt.
to some degree,
It's
it is
much more
different,
covert,
you know.
you know.
Correct, but that's been more or less the case even before. Maybe there was there was that period when it became very very clear and evident in front. But
Yeah.
anyway, going back to what we were talking about in terms of MAGA, and I think that's really a lot of his opponents are trying to peg him, saying, well, he's trying to bring us back, and then they focus on the Jim Crows and all these things as their reason for why they don't want to go back there. But like I said, because if you listen really to what he's talking about, he's really primarily talking about economics and so forth. And he very seldom indulge in these little nuances of things that, and it's very interesting in that regard.
But even his critics, I sound like Cicero here, back in the time of my friend Julius Caesar. Cicero was very critical of Caesar, by the way.
Sure.
But even the people that criticize him severely, like the Schumers and the Pelosi's and the Cortezes and all that, they themselves live in
Yeah.
elitist, insulated, elite segregated areas of wherever they live, right?
Well,
So they're not living
I mean,
in
well,
they're not living in an eclectic area where you have
commune or
actual
whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
multiple populations and multiple strata of economic capacity, right? They're
Yep.
all living in elite towers and elite places driven by chauffeurs. That's what chaps my butt, man. Is I admit I have an upper middle class world that I've carved out that was mostly defined by white society. I admit it. I like it. But they won't admit when they're criticizing that they themselves are living an elite lifestyle.
Well, I do know something here. Here's something that I know. Maybe not everyone, and never want a blanket statement to everyone, but imagine living in, let's say, the projects, right? But in whatever ghetto or whatever slum that you might live in, right? And then
Yeah.
you gain certain uh, economic advantage. Okay.
Yeah.
Very few, if ever, anyone stay in those slums and continue to live
I
there
get it.
if,
Yeah,
if
I
they
get
have
it.
wealth. I mean, well, guess what? Because if they have that fancy car, guess what? It's going to get keyed. So it's not like
Yeah,
it's not even something
I
that
don't
you.
begrudge them. Let me be clear on this. We got about 5 minutes. We've been talking about MAGA. I don't begrudge anybody like Pelosi or whatever for having a mansion. All I'm saying is, I just said out loud that I live, middle class, upper middle class, and I admit it, and I like it. I earned it, but I'm not going to give it up. I don't want to give it up. But people
Yeah.
like her, when they're criticizing, don't say, "Well, I live in $1 million house." And just say it out loud. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like they criticize almost like with their compassion that they themselves are living amongst the people that they say they're trying to save, right? And
See,
they're in
that's part
touch
of the
with them.
hypocrisy, though. But see,
Right. Exactly.
that's
That's
the
what I'm
part of
calling
the
out.
hypocrisy again.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what we're calling out there. That's
like for
exactly
instance
what I'm pointing to.
AOC, right? I mean, she was a waitress, okay, before she was elected into office, okay, and then now she's, I don't know what her economic status is, but I'm pretty sure that it's much more, um, much more than what a waitress salary
Oh,
and
yeah.
person would be.
She's living like
So
she's living like a princess over there in Queens or wherever the hell she's out of New York. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, or Bernie or whatever. I mean, so all these people that are in politics, they can pound their chest all they want about sacrifice and all that, But hey, you know what? You're being fed by us, right? The general public. So yeah, you can say that you're a public servant and all that, but don't make many a mistake. I mean, there's a lot of
Well,
advantages for being
I
in
wouldn't
those
say the
positions.
general
Now,
public. I'd say the people that vote, which is a small percentage of the general
well,
public.
sure, that's
And then
fine,
even a
but
smaller percentage that actually pay attention to the
pay attention.
policies
Sure,
that those people say they promulgate and
yeah.
propagate. Uh,
And,
but
and this
one
is on
thing,
both sides of the aisle though
of course,
too. I mean,
of
my
course.
my
Well,
criticism here is not just
I'm a reluctant Republican. They're just as disgusting in their own way. But one thing we didn't talk about that I want to talk about perhaps at another show, we got about 3 minutes. We've been talking about what is MAGA? What does Trump mean by MAGA? How do we accept MAGA? How do we repudiate MAGA? What parts of MAGA do we want? We haven't talked about one of the most important dynamics in the history of this country that changed the way that we relate or not relate to each other. And I'm not talking about technology. I'm not talking about this thing. I hope the logo didn't show. Sorry. I'm talking about moving from an agrarian lifestyle to a city lifestyle.
Sure.
That the profundity of that change is something that I don't think we talk enough about, not just on this show, but sociologically, the economists, the people that study psychiatry, any of that stuff, because the whole self-reliance and autonomy and true reliance on each other as little tribal communities when you're on a farm or living in an agrarian lifestyle, that changed absolutely when you lived in verticality in populated city, a city lifestyle situation. So we got about a couple of minutes, but do you have any concluding thoughts? We've been talking about MAGA. Yeah. This is Inside Reality. I'm Jeffrey Candelaire. This is Jimmy Tran. Moving from farms to cities.
Yeah. Well, I definitely have a lot to talk about, and we won't have time here to go over all of it. But I want to point out that like even in I remember watching a short interview from somebody that came from the Amish community. Okay, I don't know if it's widespread or how widespread it is, but even in the Amish community, they've embraced things like solar panels, for instance, and they're bringing power to their community through solar panel, because part of why they chose that particular lifestyle and cultural context was not so much because they are anti-technology, but rather they just didn't want to be dependent, and so they wanted to maintain that self-sustained, self-sufficiency.
Well, autonomy, self-reliance, yeah.
Autonomy, exactly. And so because of that, but now with solar panel and all that kind of stuff, they're able to benefit from some of the modern conveniences.
They also embrace that whole homogeneity. They all look like each other. Anyway, we've been talking about MAGA. Hope you like the show. Please share the show. Please subscribe to the show. I'm Jeffrey Candelaire. This is Inside Reality. We'll be with you next week. Thanks for producing the show, Jimmy.
And drop your comments, because we would like to hear from your thoughts as well, in terms of what your thoughts are in terms of MAGA as well. Because I think that at the end of the day, MAGA is more about each individual deciding what is great that we have lost and returning to that greatness. I think
it's each individual sharing their truth, their interpretation of the world experience.
Correct.
Because, like I said before, we will never see this pen the same way. It's impossible.
Yeah.
All we can say is it's a pen, and we share a frame of reference. Anyway, have a great week, and be safe.
You too. And all right, talk to you later.